Hi, Lisa Fletcher, Chief of Realm 4 Initiatives at ASU. Realm 4 is a group that we call Education Through Exploration. So it's us figuring out ways to bring technology, tools, initiatives to bear for our students so that they have all the support possible while they are at ASU to succeed through their programs. I will let my panelists introduce themselves, starting with John.
Yeah, I'm John VandenBrook. I'm the Associate Dean of Immersive Learning at ASU and also a professor in our College of Integrated Science and Arts.
My name is Annie Hale. I'm the Executive Director of the Action Lab and Internal Research Unit at Arizona State University and faculty in the College of Global Futures.
I'm Mike Anilletta. I'm the Associate Dean for Learning Innovation at ASU, and I'm also a professor in the School of Life Sciences.
And if we haven't already alluded, we are open for the fun. Feel free to interrupt if you have questions or want to make things enjoyable next 40 minutes. Feel free to chime in. I'm sure some of you know about Dreamscape or read about it or have interacted with us in the past, but in case anyone has not, I will slightly set the stage. I'm going to read you how we describe Dreamscape Learn. So Dreamscape Learn is a collaborative venture between Dreamscape Immersive and Arizona State University. The mission is to merge the most advanced experiential pedagogy with entertainment industry's best cinematic storytelling to deliver unique reality and 2D labs in full course experiences which are efficacious, scalable, and emotionally engaging. Sheesh, that's a long single sentence. So let's unpack that a little bit and tell you more what that means. Maybe Mike and John, I'll throw this one to you guys. Tell us a little bit more specifically in words that mean something to this whole crew on what this is that we're doing. And then talk a little bit about the specific first course we built in biology to understand contextually what this is.
Yeah, so basically at ASU we have something called Education Through Exploration. And that's the idea that the student is the scientist, the student is the explorer, the students are agent in their education. So when we sat down to develop Dreamscape Learn, we really wanted to embrace that idea. How could we make the student the center of the experience that we built? And this collaboration with Dreamscape, really that leaned into what Hollywood was good at, which is storytelling. And so it's a very natural way for students to learn through story. Everyone in this room at some time in their life has learned through story. So what we do is we make the student the central character in a story. And just like movies and stories have 3 acts, what we build inside of our virtual reality experiences have 3 acts. Students go into VR the first time, often in a fictional place. So today we're going to talk about biology. And in that case, they go to an intergalactic wildlife sanctuary that's traveling around the galaxy protecting species before they go extinct. In that first experience, they discover a problem, a novel problem they care about solving that they can't just go look up the answer to. In that experience, they get real data. That data is then ported out to the learning management system. We use Canvas. And then students come outside virtual reality for 3 hours, and everything they do in the 3 hours is related to the narrative that was inside of the VR experience. So it's a very seamless integration. In that 3 hours outside of VR, students analyze data, they build models, develop hypotheses, and most importantly, they make quantitative predictions. Armed with that quantitative prediction, they then go back into VR in the second act, and they test those hypotheses. And the second act always has a twist. We work with Walter Parks, who's a movie writer, and he loves central irony, so something that you couldn't have seen coming. You come out again of VR for 3 hours, and now your job is to develop a resolution of the problem. Data for data's sake aren't helpful. Data are about making a decision, making a call about something, figuring out whether something's supported or not. So in that 3 hours, they now develop a resolution to the problem. They then go back in the third act, and they deploy that resolution. And the third act is always very narratively engaging. It can be happy or sad, exciting, whatever emotion we're going for. So the key there is the seamless integration of inside VR and outside where the narrative continues. Now through everything I just described, you should think of that as formative. It's a way for the students to gain a set of skills that they should be able to apply to any problem. In some ways we actually don't care if they can solve the problem in VR. What they want them to be able is to take those skills and solve novel problems that we give them in any context. So now the last time they come out, they're given a summative assessment which is on a real world problem. So we always bring it back to the real world even though the stories may be fictional. So if they learned about a fantastical spotted glider in Illyria with a transmissible cancer, they come out the last time like in a breast cancer problem or ulcer problem, and that's how the cadence works. It leans heavily into story, heavily into engagement, with the narrative continuing inside and out. And maybe I'll pass it over to Mike for a moment, just talk a little bit about more of the curricular aspects and what happened in those 3 hours and the design behind that.
Yeah, one of the things that's key is that the student is the protagonist in a story that never ends. So when you walk into class, if it's a biology class and you just came from this fantastic VR experience where you were in an intergalactic wildlife sanctuary and you were talking to artificial intelligence and you were dealing with all these problems, you shouldn't walk into class and have me say, okay, now it's time for your class. You should walk in and what's on your desk is a briefing, a mission briefing, written in the voice of the characters. And so what you're doing is you're learning without realizing that you're learning. And because we can build these stories, to any problems we want, we can actually tailor the problem in VR to be the very thing that we want to teach our students in this first year course. So you might say to yourself, in a biology class, obviously we're going to do things like, dissecting animals or looking at microscopes, but no, not really, because it turns out today, in our modern world, these are not the skills that matter most to these students. Most of these students are not going to go on to be biologists, and they're certainly not going to be research scientists like myself or John. They're going to end up needing a whole slew of transferable skills that all employers want. Skills that not only help whether you're a biologist or even a scientist, but help in any career. So Dreamscape Learn is all about, at the moment, addressing these major gaps in learning for first-year students that don't know how to solve problems. They don't know how to quantitatively reason. They don't know how to communicate or work in teams. And these are, in fact, the skills that are foundational for then developing success in future courses, which focus on more specialized areas of whatever your subject matter is.
Okay, so I think we've set the stage. I know I see a few familiar faces that maybe knew what Dreamscape was. Hopefully you have enough context if you did not. I will also say we have a Dreamscape, what we call pod downstairs, so if you've never seen it, we don't have a lot of slots left, but if somebody is eager and really wants to see it, maybe you can twist my arm and I'll sneak you into a section if you need further context. Otherwise, tons of materials we can send you, catch us after. Now, Dreamscape has been going for a couple of years, so kind of the impetus for this session was to really talk about how the data's gone the last 2 years, because I think that's a critical point. We had a lot of early data, but we wanted to share with you guys now that we have 2 years worth. So we're going to spend the next few minutes really deep diving into that, and then we'll go back to the macro level again after that. So Annie, I'm going to hit you hard with a whole bunch of back-to-back research questions.
Okay.
So first, can you just set the stage on what Action Lab is?
Yeah, so Action Lab is an internal research and data service unit. We're a service unit that supports the university. So if ASU invests in a product, a brand new pedagogy, they want to add a teaching curriculum, they're curious if it's going to have success for students, if it's efficacious or not, Action Lab is there to study it. So this could be scholarships, it could be an external company, it could be something that we're building internally. So we study lots of different things.
Great, thank you. Tell us a little bit about your approach for studying Dreamscape over the last couple of years.
Yes, so Action Lab, I like to say that we are like a Crayola box, okay? I've got statisticians, cultural anthropologists. Myself, I'm a social scientist by training. I've got brilliant statisticians, data analysts. We come together to solve these problems through what we call a co-informed approach. This is taking multiple data points, not just ABC grades or DEFWs, right? But we're looking at the holistic thing of what is happening and really trying to understand what mechanisms are being pulled, how faculty and students, the system is coming together. That could be the learning management system. Take a 360 approach to really study it in a holistic way.
Okay, can you go even deeper into some of your methods?
Yeah, so it depends on what we're studying. So we're really interested in talking to students, talking to faculty. We like to do classroom observations. We, analyze various assignments. We also collect all the traditional student information data, ABC rates, classes they've had prior, classes they're going to have in the future. We look at, assignment grades. Any piece of data that we can get our hands on, we want to look at it. We don't have one particular methodology. So if you have one tool, if you have a hammer, you're hunting for a nail. We are a box of different people with different ways of approaching data and research, and we really come together to problem solve in that 360 way.
Great, and now results.
Yeah, so we've been studying Dreamscape Learn since spring of 2022. Action Lab is independent to any of these projects, right? And so many of the projects that we study, they're not successful, right? And when they're not successful, that's great for ASU and for Action Lab because we walk away with great key insights of things that we can do better on other projects. And when we sit down to talk about what sort of a research study we want to do, we'll advise on things that we've learned from previous things that ASU has taken on. It just so happens to be that when we started studying Dreamscape Learn, this is like a big endeavor, right? You're going to put virtual reality, brand new pedagogy with storytelling in Bio 181 and Bio 182. This is required classes for graduation in that foundational year that students take, introductory courses. And so it's like, this is really important that we get it right. And so in spring of 2022, we actually did a randomized control trial where we broke up students into the brand new old lab curriculum. Bio 181 is a 4-credit class, so we're talking about studying the 1 credit, which is lab. We broke up half the students in what we called the business as usual, the labs the way they always previously were, and half of them into brand new Dreamscape Learn classes that have the brand new pedagogy, the storytelling, and the VR. And we tried to just see what we could see. And it was really interesting in spring of 2022 because when we compared student grades on the Dreamscape Learn assignments versus the traditional assignments, students were 1.7 times more likely to earn between 90 and 100% on the Dreamscape Learn assignments, okay? But that's one semester, like, is that just a one semester effect? could we really see this again? So Action Lab committed to studying this 5 years into the future. And so I'll kind of skip away from spring of 2022, although that's publicly available so you guys can all dig into that. But in fall of 2022, we set out to study it, and we just completed a 2-year retrospective study. So we were able to look at 2 academic years worth of data. This is 4,002 unique students that we have tracked since fall of 2022 forward. It's an accounting nightmare, if you can imagine, okay? And that's just biology. We're studying all sorts of other things, and there's over 40,000 students that have gone through all the various Dreamscape things that these guys put together and work on every day. So I'm just gonna zero in on 2 academic years, 4,002 students, and what happened there. And so we do pre-course surveys, post-course surveys. The ACT sequence that John was talking, there's one 15-minute VR in 1 week, another week, and a third week, which makes up a whole entire module with 3 acts. At the end of those 3 acts, we do post-act surveys. Every time the students come out of the VR, they take off their headset, we ask them a bunch of survey questions in real time, and so we're really trying to Scooby-Doo, murder mystery this, like what is happening, right? We do classroom observations, we've done 91 hours of 1-hour conversations with the students, and we've done hundreds of hours of classroom observations at this point, and assignment analyses and all of that. So it's a huge endeavor with a grand scale of effort behind it.
Okay, good. Any burning questions that someone needs to know, something that wasn't clear before we go on? I'll make sure the stage is set well. Okay, good. And again, feel free to chime in. Okay, so Mike and John, Annie shared these impressive results. I think it's worth noting that I'm very
Lisa,
impressed.
I didn't go into all the results. I just set the stage
You
of
said-
all the
yeah,
research. Sorry.
do you mind talking about the semester effect?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just tell you some findings that we found. Okay, so I'm going to read these because there's a lot. So the median 181, 182 feedback result on how they felt about the VR was a 5 out of 5 every single week, and this is thousands of students, the 4,002 students. Of the 91 hours that we interviewed, 79 of them unprompted, so they felt incredibly immersed in the virtual reality, which was really exciting. We also found that students that are in the School of Life Sciences, so these are the majors that are taking the class, which is the predominant population of students that are taking it, they were more likely to remain School of Life Sciences majors than the previous years that we looked. And we looked back at 2018 to 2022, no Dreamscape Learn in there, and we looked at those cohorts compared to this cohort, and we can see that they're more likely to remain in the major, which is a big deal, because if you're following STEM attrition, that's a big deal that they're more likely to remain. Not only are they more likely to remain, but relative to their final course grade in Bio 181, let's say they had a B, when they go into Bio 182, they have a quarter letter grade better. Okay, and so this support, the storytelling, the brand new curriculum creates a better quarter letter grade better effect into 182. But okay, that's great, 181, 182, quarter letter grade better, but what about longitudinally? And so we looked at general genetics, which is 340, which is later on closer towards graduation, and we see that those students are also going to have a quarter letter grade improvement. So what's happening here is sticky enough and supporting them to be successful later on. And then this one is particularly exciting, regardless of who the background of the students are, who they are, their level of preparedness. On the Dreamscape Learn assignments, everyone earned between 90 and 94% on those assignments. And that was a model means analysis that Dr. Michael Sears did, who's in the audience right here. And so just a huge successful approach at looking at the data, and there's tremendous results that came out of it.
And real quick, the rigor study.
Yeah, so we did essentially what I like to call a three out of 5 dentist degree. Okay, so a few semesters ago, we took Flynn, POSCO, and Veneer, and we compared it to Dreamscape Learn labs. Okay, and so if you're familiar, those are like out-of-box labs that you can get online. And we had faculty at other universities, many R1 universities, analyze these out-of-box curriculum, and we compared it to this other thing called Dreamscape Learn that they had said they had never heard of. And we had them look at it through Bloom's taxonomy, depth of knowledge, a whole other way of looking at these, curriculum. And what they said is they felt like Dreamscape Learn was really, really rigorous and maybe very challenging. And so during our 1-hour interviews with those faculty, they said, well, they thought the Dreamscape Learn stuff was great, but maybe it'd be too hard. And so when I showed them the results of how well students were doing, the faculty were blown away. And so that study was also particularly exciting, kind of rounding out the research that we've been doing.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mike and John, you guys designed the biology courseware. So why do you think, based on how you designed this and what you hoped would happen, why do you think students performed well in 181, into 182, into subsequent courses? Talk about your logic there and how it has persisted so far.
Yeah, I'll start with why were we able to give an academically more rigorous curriculum, as evidenced by the external reviewers. to a class, and in fact, even our own faculty at first were like, "Oh, this is too hard. We can't, we can't do this stuff." We all want them to be quantitative, our students, but they're not ready for it. They can't do it. They can't even read graphs. So what we did, first of all, there's no secrets to it. All the things that we did were the things that if you went to the School of Education on any campus, they'd be telling you should do it. So we scaffolded the curriculum. We said, okay, if we're going to teach a skill for the first time, connect it to something they know. Give them a demonstration of how to do it, right, and from an expert level. Then give them practice in doing it in different contexts. Then give them automated constructive feedback. And we do this in this narrative world, it's even more engaging than I'm just doing it because I want to do it. So the way to do that is we created a learning progression for the whole course. And we said if this is a high-level quantitative skill, let's unpack that into the sub-goals required to get to that skill, right? So I'm doing some sort of analysis. Clearly there's other analytical things that lead up to that high-level analysis. And so then let's start with this one first. And then they're practicing that multiple times in the beginning, ultimately before they add on that new layer of that skill. So like, for me and John and other people in biology, this is like news. If you go to education school, this is like how you're supposed to design curriculum. So what I want to get across is part of this is not just awesome VR, if you've ever seen it. The VR is awesome, there's no doubt. It's mind-blowing, it's captivating, enthralling. But then, on top of it is really like advanced pedagogy relative to what we were doing before. So we put in the effort to make everything dovetail. So now what that means is, and because we focus on transferable skills, like problem solving, quantitative reasoning, I go on to my next class, and now instead of being the student that can't read a graph, or can't calculate a probability, or can't construct an argument with reasoning, I'm the student that can do that, and just because you've given me a new context, it's not that much more challenging than all the various contexts in which I did it in that first year curriculum. And so now, in a sense, you might be tempted to say, well, we just taught them better at the basics of the concepts of biology, but actually I think it's beyond that. We taught them better about how to be problem solvers and how to learn across contexts. And so that because really, like we look at it all the time as scientists. John, for example, was a chemist who became a geologist, who became a physiologist, who ran a vet school, who now runs a VR production company. And you ask him what it is, it's all the same. It's all modeling how a system works and variables and figuring out how to tweak those to get the right outcome. So that's what we're teaching. So when they go on to genetics, they're quantitatively more comfortable, but on top of that, they know how to teach themselves things that are complicated by following those procedures that we set up for them in a scaffolded way in that first year. I think, John, you have some other thoughts about this as well, right?
Yeah, no, obviously that is a big part of the main effect, but I think there's just a couple other things that are in play here. So one is, typically, who does well is intro biology class in college? A student had AP biology. Why? They've had all the problems before. So one of the things that we really tried to do with Dreamscape Learn by using these novel contexts is level the playing field for everybody. Nobody's ever been in a Galactic Wildlife Sanctuary. And so a big problem with student success is students don't feel like they can be a scientist. They feel behind from the beginning of this whole thing. So one of the aspects that I didn't talk about really much is we looked at science identity across all of this. And what we saw is that across this entire curriculum, students' identity increased across the curriculum, and that was across the board. So all students, regardless of background, felt there was more of a high science identification. The second thing is, I think the engagement truly matters. So yes, I totally agree with Mike that the curricular redesign was really important, but why is the VR important? Well, students being engaged in the curriculum, it's if you keep an audience engaged with you in a movie or a story, then they will stay with you. It's the same exact thing in college. And for some reason, we think in higher ed or even in K-12 that people should just want to be there. They should just want to listen to whatever Mike and I are saying on a stage. Well, I'll tell you what, they do not want to be there. And so that's through no fault of their own. I mean, I think we're failing them, to be completely honest with you. So by engaging the students and making them more engaged in their curriculum that they're going through, they're more likely to persist. And then lastly, I think a big part of it is even that early success. So if you look at who leaves ASU, in the first 2 semesters, that's where all of the attrition is. Mm-hmm. But if you make it through the first and second course, your likelihood of persistence increases by multiplicatively. So I think those are 3 aspects that outside of, yes, we made a great curriculum, or we think we did at least, these other aspects that are in play with using this approach that really we haven't tapped to any other way and things that we tried to build before. So.
Yeah, and Annie, I know you specifically studied engagement, but maybe some other things. So if you want to talk about, do you think any one of these particular design philosophies were ones that really came through as productive ways of, rethinking this curriculum?
Yeah, so, we're obsessed with, in Action Lab, and me in particular, like, there's so many educational, tools out there, products out there that have great promise, but they don't actually study whether there's an effect or not, and that drives me crazy, right? Like, so what's the big idea? What do you hope to solve, and how can you prove it that it actually did that? We should be asking that of every tool that you're encountering right now at GSV or at the air show. What are you setting out to do? What's the goal? How are you going to prove that it actually worked? And so flow state research, I don't know if you guys are into flow state research, look it up, it's really cool. Engagement and then VR presence, but not only presence within the VR, but presence within the whole entire experience. We asked that 3 times throughout the 15-week semester at the end of each one of these modules. Questions about flow state, questions about engagement, and questions about VR presence, all grounded in the academic literature. And what we find is that flow state, presence, and engagement lead to higher lab scores. But what was really interesting in our research is when we accounted for the amount of times they went into the VR, that would also boost their lab score grade. And so it's about being engaged in the story, wanting to know what happens next. These little creatures, crazy things happen, and the students are really interested to know if that creature died in the next week, right? I mean, these students are 19. That's the average age of our campus student freshman year on campus, right? And so they want to know. They think it's really exciting. They feel like they're living in an exciting time to go into the VR, to participate in this, and then the story continues on in the assignments that they have to do. And so that's highly motivating to them. And so another thing is the flow state. Like Mike, you were talking about great pedagogy, just-in-time materials, resources. That's what flow state is studying. And it's like, if you know what to do next, you're more likely to stay engaged. If you're lost and you don't know where to turn in your homework assignment, or you don't know how to ask for help, or you're like stuck on something, you don't know what to do, that's when you kind of exit and engagement starts to decrease. And so all these pieces, intentionally or unintentionally, you guys created an environment that has set up such that students are going to do well.
Okay, great. Lots of data answers so far. We're going to pop over and have a little fun.
Okay.
Tell me your favorite story or 2 that you've heard from the students.
Shall I go first? Can I go first?
I know
Okay.
you love your story.
Okay, I do love all my stories. I'm like, please let me tell this story. Okay, and I'm excited to see your guys' stories. Okay, so like I said, I'm a social scientist, right? Okay, so I'm really interested in how people think and feel, and I've had the pleasure of joining my researchers in the lab and doing the classroom observations, okay? So lab is 3 hours long, if you guys remember, and maybe you teach or you participate in making labs for your class. But the idea with our ethnographic research is that 2 researchers sit in the classroom, we're trying to be a fly on the wall, right? And so we're like taking paper and pen notes. The class got really silent. Okay, it's like a think, pair, share kind of paradigm in the class. Okay, so it goes through these cycles of being very, very quiet and very, very loud, where everybody's doing things and they're talking to each other and they're working, okay? So the class happened to be quiet right now, and they're all sitting and staring at their computer screens at Excel files, mind you. They're not looking at anything other than little numbers on an Excel file. And the students in front of me, they go, "Psst, hey, can you look at my screen? I don't think I'm getting the right result." And so the other student comes over and they look at it and they start giggling. It's the lab class, right? So there's 4 students at that little black tabletop. They all come over and they're looking at the Excel file and they're like, "Well, don't do that." And then they said a bad word, and I won't say it for you here, so I'll clean up my language for you. But they use a bad word. They're like, "Well, don't do that. You're gonna bleep bleep the astelar. Don't kill the little astelar guy." Okay, and then just like you guys did, they started laughing. They said a little too loud and the class was really quiet. So other students, I teach in the College of Global Futures. I've never had students randomly pop up, go from one side of the room over to another to look at Russell's computer screen of Excel file stuff, right? There's like this excitement of what's happening in the classroom. So the students came over and they're all looking and they're laughing and they're talking about how you would do the data analysis differently to get a better result. And so it's like, they care about those students, the students care about the characters so much that like when the assignments I perceive to be challenging or maybe boring because it's Excel, the story carries them to be excited and do more.
Well, it's crazy when you give data meaning. Like, we could give the exact same Excel file with 100 different data points, 120, 140, 162, 189, whatever, and tell you to do something with this, and be like, okay, that's boring. But when you suddenly know that that's a creature's heart rate or something else, then you're looking at it with different engagement. You're looking at it in a way of like it means something to you, and so you care differently, and we're seeing that.
This was the night that I realized something magical was happening here. And at this point, I didn't know Lisa very well, and I called her. It's a 7:30 p.m. class that this observation happened to take place in. And so by the time I got out, it was like 10 o'clock, and I called her and I was like, "I've got a story for you." And that's when I realized, like, ooh, the power of storytelling and great pedagogy, this is going to be transformative. Yeah. Mike, I want to hear yours.
Well, our perspective is a little different. So having been a biologist and taught lab many, many years, like 20 some years, I was a little nervous about the fact that we're replacing a lot of the hands-on lab exercises with VR and then quantitative reasoning. Although I truly think from my career perspective, those are the most valuable skills to being successful in a career. But at the same time, it's very different than what students expect. So Annie mentioned that she did a lot of interviews with students, and she showed us the transcript of one interview and said, one of the students said, you know, I'm a hands-on learner and I really prefer the much more applied stuff. And I went, oh, and I went, she meant the VR. She actually thought because she was in VR as a biologist doing stuff that she was doing hands-on applied stuff. And I had interpreted it as she wanted to do a wet lab where she was in there just measuring stuff without any context. So that made me feel really good.
Mm-hmm. That is a good story.
Yeah, I mean, so just a little different perspective for me as well. So Mike and I, actually, I mentioned this, we actually write the stories, right? And so it was really hard to believe anyone would like them, to be honest with you. So, and there's a little bit of spoiler alert here, but if you would do our physiology module, there's a creature in there that's quite large. Her name is Zor, and she dies in the third act. And I get a lot of grief for having written that. And,
well, wait, can I say this? Students cry over this, Sean.
I know.
Like, literally, they actually cry when they come out of the VR.
Yeah, and so one of my stories, there's a lot of online posts about this, as one might imagine, and one student posted, oh, I'm so sad, I'm going to pour one out for my homie Zor. And I thought, the fact that they're putting that into a Facebook post, or an Instagram post, or whatever it was, it's really hard to believe. And so people ask us a lot, what's the most surprising thing about this? In some ways, is it even exists. Like that we were able to bring this together, create it, not only did it have the impact, I think that's something that Mike and I really appreciate about the research that's being done, so we can see the efficacy of the efforts we put behind it, along with our teams.
To be clear, we both thought, because we were actually trying to make a far more rigorous curriculum, as Andy pointed out, we would have been happy if they did just as well in the new curriculum as they did in the old one, because we knew they were getting more rigorous skills that would serve them better. But they did better, so I don't think we could. That's amazing to me.
Yeah, never expected.
What was Mike, when you're building the curriculum, like, what was your what was the foundational goal? Like, did you have like a guiding principle?
Yeah, the guiding principle
Sorry, I
was,
had to ask. I'm just curious.
I went to grad school and got a job and realized I got ripped off for 4 years. And then I learned nothing in undergrad that I use today. And then everything I use today, almost all of it, I learned afterwards teaching myself in grad school. And so like I couldn't do anything by the time I got to grad school. And I think John, I don't know if you had the same experience, but we had similar mindsets about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Mike told my story right. For me, it was, I think these are the two things that you see in the curriculum. So having done all these different things that Mike listed off kind of jokingly, is in fact my story, and that realization they're all the same, there's a foundational set of skills, really set this up, right? So what does someone actually need to be a scientist or biologist? But more importantly, only 20% of our students are going to be that. So what do the rest of the 80% need? And that's where I really thought, and probably most of you in this room probably do not have a job in what your degree is. And maybe you do, maybe, but very few in fact do. So it's really about setting up for future success. And that's why the semester over semester effects, or the future course effects for me are, were quite impressive.
And I think our use of VR was to trick students into caring about learning those skills and thinking that there's a value to them now, knowing that there is a value to them when they graduate, right?
Yeah.
But we need to give them a value now, because that knowing 4 years is never going to motivate anybody.
Yeah, so for instance, a big part of the course is mentions Excel. Well, 88% of employers want Excel skills. I mean, that's like a very simple example, but there's many more we could go into. So.
Yeah. There was a student that we interviewed who was also taking classes in WP Carey, which is our business school, and they had said, I was struggling with my homework because they didn't, in WP Carey, they hadn't really explained how to use Excel to do this analysis, but they happened to be taking, did I tell you this one? They happened to happened to be taking Bio 181, and they're like, oh, everything that we were doing in Bio 181 helped me with my business class. And I was like, well, that's random.
Yeah.
Or not, right? Not random, because you guys are infusing them to have skills, right? You wanted them to have skills, yeah, exactly.
Since Andy's moderating, I'll
Lisa, tell us your favorite story. Tell us your favorite story.
I'll just say I love the first week of classes. We have about 7,000 students that go through VR per week, and just sitting down there that first week is so fun. At ASU, we admit a lot of students from all sorts of different backgrounds, so even just watching the students come out and be like, I never thought I would have access to bougie technology, or like, I never thought I would do VR in school, or that was so fun, I can't wait to come back. A lot of expletives, yes. You did a lot of like, that was so cool. And
yeah.
Like, okay, great. Like, can't capture that one on paper, but I'm glad you
I did capture it on paper.
It's true. But that first week of classes is always, it's quite magical to sit down there and watch students come out. Okay.
The bougie technology is actually a quote from one of our students too.
Okay, so Mike, based on the research, based on kind of reflecting back over the last couple of years, what lessons learned and what key research pieces will you use to inform your future design as we move forward to next steps?
Well, one of the things that came out of Annie's interviews with students and also the survey questions is that it really reinforces that what drives the sustained enthusiasm for this course over the year is the story. The stories have to be engaging, but they also have to be new each time, because it's like, why do you turn into Netflix for the next series? Because you want to see what's going to happen, as opposed to if it were a video game, after a while you want a new game, right? So like, how do we provide a great story that I, as a student, feel is authentic and makes me feel like the person I'm training to become? It's not easy. So that's a huge challenge. But the other thing we learned from these interviews is that students really want to feel like they actually shape the story, And so finding new ways to give agency to students in VR, but also out of VR, that don't completely have one student going off in one direction and learning random things that have nothing to do with the curriculum. So there's a challenge there, right? Because in an open world of a story where we're actually shaping everything, we're all going to be just doing whatever and not learning anything specific. And so trying to find that balance are things that we work on now with all the courses that we're building. And one way to actually keep the story going and to give students the sort of the illusion of agency is to enable them to engage with the characters outside of VR. So we're actually developing an AI that is one of the characters. So if you don't know the biology one, if you've ever done it, you're in an intergalactic wildlife sanctuary, which is a space station saving species that are throughout the galaxy likely to go extinct if they're not there. And you have an artificial intelligence that runs this thing, and it speaks to you in a voice. It sounds like David Attenborough. So how cool would it be if I'm now in my class, and instead of asking my teaching assistant for help, I could use a comm link and talk to that Attenborough character and get a response in Attenborough's voice. So that's what we're working on now, and it's going to know all the stuff that's in the story, it's going to know all the stuff that's in the curriculum, and it's going to be my buddy, my mentor, my friend outside of VR, so I'm still going to feel like I am me in that story as opposed to I am in class doing an assignment. So it's things like that I think we're trying to figure out how to keep the students engaged through narrative, how to keep them feeling like they have agency to keep the story going.
And as Mike's talking about the creatures, one of the stories that I thought one of them would tell and they didn't, so I'm going to go back for 2 seconds.
Oh, sure.
They love the creatures. They're charmed by them. They're excited. They're sad when they die. We have heard, this is the frog cat. This is one of the creatures. Kind of bizarre looking little guy. We had a student dress up as this creature for Halloween, which I was like, okay, this is good. We've gone so far as hearing that somebody has this tattooed on their body. And I was like, okay, you know when someone wants this permanent, like it has really stuck with them, and they had a
They tried to show me during the interview. I was like,
No. Boundaries. So John, talk a little bit about what's next.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one thing I'll mention is Mike sort of hit how challenging some of this is. I mean, you kind of see how it all came together, but if you'd asked us to think about how to teach biology in a different way, actually Mike had been working on that for many years. If you said build something in VR, we actually had done that before too with other companies, but none was very satisfying. And if you said, Walter, write a good story, he would be able to do it. When you say write a good story that teaches biology inside virtual reality, you realize how many constraints are really put on that, like how much time that actually takes. So when we make these interventions, we try to do them in very large introductory courses that have problems at the university. So biology, for instance, we had 6,000 online majors, 5,000 in-person majors, 48% of the students drop out. Like these are things, big problems, right? So that's what we're sort of addressing now. So one of the things we moved on to now is chemistry, general chemistry, which has many of the same students, but obviously many more who struggle at it. And there's a slightly different problem that we're solving in each one. So in chemistry, part of the problem is students hate chemistry. Why? We actively make them hate chemistry. We are not doing our jobs very well. 2 is the same sort of quantitative issues that we have in biology, we have in chemistry as well. So we have a different meta-narrative. So in biology, you're part of the Intergalactic Wildlife Sanctuary. In chemistry, you're part of the Institute for Telepresent Exploration that can send your avatar at any scale, anywhere in the world at any time, solving the world's crises, one molecule at a time. So you're a bit of a spy agency, and there's other counter agents that you're working against, but it's really leaning very much even more into the narrative in some ways than I think we did in biology, but that same approach. 3 acts, you're inside VR, you're outside VR. One slight difference is in biology, we completely got rid of the wet labs. So they don't do wet labs at all. It's completely dry labs. It's all quantitative data analysis because those were the foundational skills. Well, in chemistry, there's something called the American Chemical Society, which accredits, and you have to do a certain number of hours in the lab. So we now maintain the wet lab, but the wet lab is inside of the narrative. So if I'm in there and I have to stop this bomb from going off, and I have this little clue that's a blob, when I come out of VR, I hand you that blob, and that's what you analyze. So again, there's something driving you through the narrative. So that's our general chemistry. It'll be six modules like we had in biology. We're also working in astronomy. Now, a little bit different in astronomy is we actually have a meta-narrative across the entire semester. So it'll be 7 experiences, but it's only one story. So it'll still have 3 acts, but the act breaks are not 1 experience, 1 act, 2 experience, 2 acts. And in there, you find something that you had no idea was in the galaxy, and you're trying to determine, is this the end of the world, or is this the world's biggest scientific opportunity? And so you're doing a whole bunch of skills to determine, is it coming at us? What is this thing? And so that kind of plays out over 7 acts. And then in our history, it's a little bit different approach as well. So each, as you can see, a little different flair. In our history, we actually have 3 acts inside of a single experience. And so that's really about having students be able to go to places they otherwise couldn't go. So for instance, one of them is the Hagia Sophia, one of them will be Seti's tomb, one of them will be the Parthenon, and one of them will be Teotihuacan in South America, are the 4 that are sort of planned to begin with. And that's really about giving the student a unique experience. So we always ask ourselves, what is the advantage of doing VR? If I take the same exact lab that I did outside of VR and put it inside VR, I'll tell you what, you get absolutely no difference in outcome. And we've tried that. That's a bad approach. We did that with the company before. So it's all about how do I take the advantages and affordances of VR to give them a student experience they couldn't do. So there's some of the products. We also build things internally, school within space exploration, sustainability, music theory, microeconomics, supply chain management. So we have a whole bunch of internal builds as well that ASU is leading on, separate from maybe what Dreamscape Learn the company is. Those are the products I just mentioned. So.
And what's fun about some of those internal builds is a lot of them are student-led. So we're teaching students these skills. So we teach a designing for Dreamscape course, so they learn how to code on this platform and put it on the Dreamscape software development kit. So it's important that we're also getting our students workforce ready. So it's great to see these products come out. One of the ones that's downstairs at the booth is our sustainability experience on the Arctic that was primarily led by a student build. So that's exciting just to see what the team can do at a kind of professional level, and then also how our really little 18, 19, 20-year-olds can build great stuff too. And Annie, will you research all these things?
Yes, so we are
That was it.
lucky us. Yes. Okay, next question.
Yeah.
I'm quite personally excited about art history only because it feels different to me than studying chemistry and biology. This is about studying like sensitive places. Should we be able to go to these particular places? So there's a lot of like situated cognition and embodied cognition that's going to be in our research. And there's also something interesting about the Hagia Sophia, which is in Turkey, is that particular VR experience kind of bends time. So you can go back and you can see where it's at present day. And so students, like even if you were to go there right now, you wouldn't be able to physically go to it in a previous time period. And so there's some interesting temporality that students are being able to explore, which as an art history lover myself, I think that's pretty exciting if you could go back in time and experience sites. And it's providing a space for also our faculty at ASU that are designing those experiences to help reconstruct and understand different social, political, contexts of the time and bring those to life. So all of that is really interesting for our research that we're doing. And, the students quite love it. We've got one little small study that we've done on art history with 100 students last semester, and they really love it because it's a very beautiful experience. And the idea of taking 100 students to Turkey, not likely, but jumping into VR together and having great discussions around it is particularly exciting.
And this might be a biased opinion, but Mike's sister actually just went there, and she came back and said, I actually put her inside VR because I actually go up to the dome and I could see everything, and I went there in person. I just got to walk around.
She sent me a bunch of pictures from this Hagia Sophia, and it showed all the same things. I literally looked at the pictures and felt like I've seen them before.
Yeah.
Like this is not like a new experience for me. I feel like I've been there just from going to VR.
And that's high VR presence, according to literature.
Yeah,
Just,
no, it's great.
Yeah, so the VR literature is like, do you feel like you really went there? That is a place that you've been, or do you remember it as a series of pictures? If you feel like you really went there, that's high VR presence. A series of pictures is low VR presence. So.
Okay, we have a whole 4 minutes. I'm going to let you put us in the hot stand. So hit us with your questions. Yes.
How easy or difficult is it to scale this across different departments, and do you consider scaling it to other universities?
Yeah, so for the scale to other universities, yes, Dreamscape Learn, while it was kind of an idea from the president of ASU, Michael Crow, and Walter Parks, who John mentioned, it was stood up as a separate company that exists. Like ASU is not the owner of Dreamscape Learn, it's its own company, so they do have about 15 partners. It started officially 2 years ago, and so they have partners both in higher ed and K-12, and higher ed community colleges and other universities, so yes, that's the intention and the hope. In terms of scale, lots of ways that that's coming about. Like already at ASU, like I said, 7,000 students per week, and that's just with 2 pods that each hold 24. So there's a lot of scale already. You just run shows all day, back to back, every 15 minutes. So you can get a lot through in a small VR room. But then also there are other things happening. So there's a 2-dimensional version that all the online students use. So you're not in a headset, but you have access to it remote, or access to it just as a web browser at home. The company is also building mobile pods, so they will be on trailers. So like if you're a campus that has lots of different locations, or you're a community college that has like 4 different campuses in your district, that would allow you the affordance to just have one pod and not build one at every location, but move that around. Also really good in K-12 because often, many schools. And then early next year, they will have headsets on a cart. So kind of like when we all started with laptops and you rolled in the cart, there will be 32 headsets on a cart. All the networking, all the abilities are right there. It'll sync every night back to your LMS and do the things you need to do on the back end logistically. So lots of ways that they're thinking about, a single pod in VR is not cheap. I think we all understand that, but really the company is focused heavily on like, how can we actually scale this? Great question.
Can I say one thing? From a research perspective, we also share all of our protocols with any of those partners. So like Merced Community College has got the Dreamscape Learn experience there, and we're talking about how to help them do research to understand their population and share back, which I'm particularly excited about.
And partners also get VR development, curriculum development guides that might get worked on to help partners build their own experiences as well in terms of like how you scale the content. So, but yes.
You said it's a 4-credit course, biology course.
Yes.
And so this is part of the 1 credit
Lab.
lab part.
Yep.
And so is the rest of it the traditional lecture-based
Well,
labs? Or?
So when we first started, yes, like it literally just bolted on to any course that we had, and that's still in case for the in-person students. They just, whatever lecturer they have, they do it however they want, and then this sits on top of that. It's been built to be that way, and all the documents and assignments are editable, so if university might have slightly different outcomes, they can do that. For our online version of the course, we completely redid the curriculum as well, and that aligns very carefully up to the learning goals that Mike and I mentioned, but there's no VR or narrative in that. It's still more of a traditional, let's say, way of teaching. We use other platforms and things, but more traditional way. Yeah.
And so what, the one credit, you said 3 hours a week, 15 weeks.
Yep.
How much time does it spend in the headset?
So in each course there's about 220 minutes of VR total. So it's about 9 experiences, 15 minutes each. So it's about 2 full-length movies of VR to give you a sense of how much was created, which is more VR than any topic before. And then so 15 minutes inside VR, 3 hours outside for the lab, and then they still have their 3 hours of lecture they would traditionally have. That's its own way. So
Per
week. Per week. That's right.
So 15 minutes. every
15
week.
Exactly, 15 minutes a week, exactly, yep. And that's just a decision here, it could be other decisions, but we would say that about 15 to 20 minutes is the right length that a pop to be inside VR. More than that begins to become a little tiresome for students, so.
That's also backed by the
Is
research.
everybody in the lab, like, if you start the class, everybody at
Yeah, so, we actually run it where they just come. So we use Canvas as our LMS. They have to sign up and pick a time. So we run shows all day, every 20 minutes. And it's in the building right next door. It's like right in the heart of campus by our Memorial Union. So in Canvas, they see I'm on week 2. I need to sign up for module 2, act 3. They can see hundreds of showtimes. They know that they need to pick one prior to their 7:30 lab on a Thursday night. So we explain all that. They know the cadence. So it's almost like a pre-read assignment, essentially. You have 15 minutes, go do your VR, and then everything in lab that week will be associated with it.
And that's supposed to be because of our scale, though. So if we had smaller classes, we would have
They
done
could come as a
we
group.
would have done the same. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. No questions?
Do schools that you work with, do they have the option to do it in a semester or a year?
Yeah, they have the option. They can do either. We're more seeing the year-long happening in the K-12 because they have to expand it across the entire. But it's really flexible. Like you could do it however you want. You could choose to do a VR every other week. You could have the 9, but choose that like our faculty have 1 3-week semester where they don't do any VR, and there's one module that they wanted to add in on top of the ones that exist on bioethics. So a lot of flexibility on how you want to pull it in. It's the 6 main topics that are taught in every college biology class, every high school biology class. It doesn't change: genetics, physiology. So you can really build it however you want to fit in your class. Extend, crunch for ASU Online. It's only 7-week courses, so 7 weeks, 1 year, whatever makes sense.
There's a question over here.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, you had made the comment that at the end of one of the acts, Zori dies or whatever. How do you keep that known outcome from impeding some of the students who are
In the
lesser
future.
willing to learn?
Oh, you mean the current students or like the future students? I thought you were going with how do you keep it from spoiling the.
From spoiling the yes, or
Yeah.
like, oh, well, I know Zori dies, so, you know.
data, though.
Let's see. Well, all I know is that I've not heard anybody complain about spoiling. I feel it's like people have the same kind of polite sort of behavior they do with shows. Like people are,
There's like ethics around it.
you know what I mean? Like somehow that carries over to this because it hasn't been as big of an
Yeah,
issue.
really,
but
I
I
mean,
think
Doesn't
that
it impede their
Change the
analytics though,
quantitative.
in terms of they already know that the data's gonna lead to her dying or something?
Well, so that's I think what I was trying
Yeah.
to get at. So we actually have a tool that because the data are quantitative and they're generated from models that are based on real biology or chemistry, we can basically press a button and regenerate a new data set that's quantitatively different but qualitatively similar, so it doesn't violate the principles of the
So you
story.
get the same outcome,
So
but the
stu-
data gives
yeah,
you.
but
Exactly,
the students
yeah.
have to do that work.
So they can't change.
Right, and I think that combined with the fact that students are not giving those spoilers out because they feel like, not very nice people doing it.
I didn't wanna use the cheating
Yeah.
word, I just
Yeah.
want, you know.
People still watch ET to this day, right? Everyone knows
Yeah.
ET goes home. So I think there's a bit of
Yeah, exactly.
spoiler alert, sorry. But yes, he goes home. Yeah,
Okay, I know time's over. Thank you so much. If you have questions, we'll hang around. QR code, we just
you
had a
want the
great.
data, yeah.
If you want the research, this is the QR code to it.